Pianists Awards winner, welcoming you to 5 Things to Listen For. Today we will be exploring the glorious music of Charles Ives, the Alcotts from his Concord Sonata. The Concord Sonata is one of the cornerstones of American piano music. Perhaps some people would consider it to be the first truly innovative work for solo piano of large scale, written by an American composer. I had known about the piece as a child. I personally had always found it to be somewhat impenetrable. It can be thorny, it can be dissonant, there's a lot going on in many of the movements. And it took me a while to grow to love the piece, but what has always remained my favorite movement from this 4-movement work has been its third part, the Alcotts. Charles Ives is a complicated character. He was extraordinarily experimental. He grew up in Danbury, Connecticut, son of a band director in town. And one of the perhaps apocryphal stories surrounding Ives' childhood was several, shall we say, experimental activities that his father, the band director, did with his band constituents. He would arrange for the band to be split into 2 groups, have one group march from one side of town to the other, while the other group would do the exact opposite. Now, what music would they be playing? They would be playing either the same or different music, but the idea would be that the key signatures that the music is written in, the kind of tonal center that all of the music is surrounding, that makes the music sound homophonous and, shall we say, intelligible to many of us, would be purposefully different in the 2 bands. So as the 2 bands converged in the center of the town, there would be this incredible, just like cacophony. And we can say this because Ives himself relished in this cacophony, and much of his own compositions could be likened to experiments where he is exploring how to layer not only different harmonies on top of each other, but also different melodies. He is one of the great musical quote artists, shall we say. He takes material from all different sources. So I find it really cool to dive deeply into this movement of the Charles Ives Concord Sonata because, one, it of course showcases so much of this unique style of his, but it does so in a more transparent way. And I think this might be perhaps why I was drawn to this movement before even some of the other movements of the sonata, because in this piece he succeeds in drawing upon all different influences and combining them, but he does so in a really cogent and transparent way. There are also several themes to listen for, one of which would be, I think, familiar to anyone who's ever heard any classical music in their lives, and that is not at all an American theme even. This is a European theme. It is the opening motive from Beethoven's 5th Symphony. It appears several times, and at, shall we say, the first really climactic moment in this movement, of which there are several, but the first one really is that motive with the original note spellings and everything. No transpositions, no funny business, very direct and to the point. Now, this is not the first time you will have heard this motive. You actually will first hear it in a totally different guise at the very, very beginning. Much calmer, more, shall we say, teaching, lecturing way. Now, why is this significant? Because the Alcotts, who are the Alcotts? And notice there's 2 Alcotts, there's not just one Alcott. The first Alcott that I think is really still remembered very much in public consciousness today is Louisa May Alcott, the daughter of Bronson Alcott, the transcendentalist philosopher and thinker. Louisa May Alcott, known for Little Women, was, and Bronson, her father, were residents of Concord, Massachusetts in the mid-19th century. And Louisa May made it her life's work to teach the local children how to read and write and how to live useful, productive, and, shall I say, noble and moral lives. This was a part of the public consciousness in New England, especially Massachusetts, in the mid-19th century, and Louisa May was perhaps at times a stern teacher, and she expected a lot of her students, not just intellects, but also moral characters. And a lot of the personality, the fabric of this work is exactly that. It is a lot of moral goodness and the sense of what it is to be a good human being. This movement in particular is very much related to that. And I think Ives is expressing this through the, shall I say, less adventurous, less cacophonous writing in this piece. And there's a serenity about the piece that is really quite attractive. Now, that being said, that's one dimension to it. The Beethoven Fifth is perhaps maybe a symbol of fate. It's a symbol of those things that are out of our control. And how do we reconcile as human beings? How do the little children of Concord, Massachusetts reconcile as human beings with the trials and tribulations and difficulties of the world and the nature of good versus evil, and how do we deal with that? Now, that's Louisa May. Bronson, however, appears in a bit more of a mystical and less concrete way. Bronson, being a transcendentalist philosopher, was one of Ives's, I'd imagine, great heroes. Among them, the other writers profiled, if you will, in this sonata, Hawthorne, Emerson, and Thoreau. And these guys, they're not so interested in moralizing, or to put it this way, they're not so interested in teaching the people how to be good citizens. They're more interested in thinking about how the world works and perhaps how does one deal with these questions themselves. And now, there's a really great moment toward the beginning of this movement where we have Bronson essentially appears, in Ives's words, thinking and living in the key of A flat. Down here in the left hand. And then meanwhile, the right hand comes in the key of B flat. So it creates this kind of beautiful but slightly unsettled synchronicity. It's very interesting. Now, this theme in the right hand I will come back to later. It's very important. A flat is Bronson, thinking, living, breathing in the key of A flat. B flat in the right hand is the sheriff of Concord, Massachusetts, Sam Staples, who, meanwhile, lives and breathes in the key of B flat, in Ives's words, over the fence. Over there, they're talking to each other as neighbors. You can imagine this dialogue. It's probably quite entertaining. But I like to think of this as really not so much about Sam Staples, as about Sam Staples representing the real world, the goings on about town. And then you have Bronson coexisting, but really kind of doing his own thing off to the side and creating through that this enchanting magical atmosphere that is Concord, Massachusetts, and that Ives is really fascinated by in this sonata. There's another Alcott, however, who doesn't usually get mentioned so often. Lizzie Alcott, Louisa May's sister, enjoyed playing the piano in their home in Concord, Massachusetts, the Alcott residence. Now, what would she play? I'm sure she would play some Beethoven, hence Beethoven Fifth. But also in the mid-19th century, a lot of folk songs from, shall we say, the old country, Europe, particularly England and Scotland, would make their appearances in the parlors of New England in the mid-19th century. And there's a beautiful, tender, heartfelt, simple theme in the middle of this piece that is perhaps tinged with a little Scottish folk idiom here and there. So that's a moment to listen for as well. So I mentioned before Bronson and the Sheriff. The Sheriff, his music that he's singing in the key of B flat is significant. This is what Ives calls the human faith theme. This theme appears in several guises. It appears really from the beginning of the movement. It also appears in other movements of the sonata, but it never really appears in its entirety until the very, very end of this movement. And though it appears later on in the fourth movement, the Thoreau movement of the sonata, it really never has the gravitas and impact again that it has at the climax of this movement. And this human faith theme, I'll play it in, shall we say, stripped down version, and you'll hear me play it in the full version in the video from my album release. It goes something like this. Here, it sounds like Beethoven. It's a pretty theme, and I think it's cool how he makes use of the Beethoven motive right in the middle of the theme. Now, what's the significance of this theme? This, I think, really gets to the core of what this whole movement and the whole sonata is all about. The triumph of the human spirit and yet questioning what our role is as human beings in society, and trying to answer those questions, never quite succeeding, and always leading to more questions. This is what Ives likes to talk about in his work, Essays Before a Sonata, which is a 150-page long book that he published concurrently with this sonata. And the work you would think would it holds many clues. You would think it would explain the whole work. It doesn't really. It just asks more and more questions. However, I would like to read a little section from this work that I think really summarizes this movement, its import, and in particular, the significance of the human faith theme, because why not hear it from the master himself? There's a commonplace beauty about Orchard House being where the Alcotts lived, made their lives, a kind of spiritual sturdiness underlying its quaint picturesqueness, a kind of common triad of the New England homestead, whose overtones tell us that there must have been something aesthetic fibered in the Puritan severity, the self-sacrificing part of the ideal, a value that seems to stir a deeper feeling, a stronger sense of being nearer some perfect truth than a Gothic cathedral or an Etruscan villa. Now, I'll just comment on this. This speaks to me insofar as Ives is now taking the puritanical kind of world that the Alcotts are living in, and he is, in a way, commenting and responding to the aesthetic beauty of its stripped-down simplicity. And there is an incredible stripped-down simplicity to this music, and also to New England, and you can go to Concord, Massachusetts now to this day. It's a little busier than it might have been in 1850, but it still has a little bit of that aesthetic core, certainly. Now he goes on. We dare not attempt to follow the philosophic raptures of Bronson Alcott. That was the guy in A flat versus Sam, the sheriff, in B flat. Unless you will assume that his apotheosis will show how practical his vision in this world would be in the next. And so we won't try to reconcile the music sketch of the Alcotts with much besides the memory of that home under the elms, the Scotch songs, Lizzie playing on the piano, and the family hymns that were sung at the end of each day. Though there may be an attempt to catch something of that common sentiment, which we have tried to suggest above, a strength of hope that never gives way to despair, a conviction in the power of the common soul, which, when all is said and done, may be as typical as any theme of Concord and its transcendentalists. So that, I think, really encapsulates what the human faith theme is all about. Ives, in his infinite creativity, manages to transform the human faith theme into many different guises in this piece. And I really hope you enjoy exploring this quite interesting, quite passionate, quite creative, path-breaking music with me.